All right. Good morning. A good Erev Shabbos. We start for the newcomers. We start with Hayom Yom, and then move into the Tanya. So today is the 17th of Menachem Av. Toiv Begamatria. Good. 17 is Begamatria. Good. A good Erev Shabbos. Very short Yom Yom. The Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, explained why fire is used as an analogy for the inner Torah. The Torah in general is called water, as water descends from a high place to a low place. So God's wisdom descends in what's called one structure is the Seder Histalshelus, where God's wisdom descends from Chochmah into Bina, into Das, etc. And the other is that Torah in general, it fills everything like water. If you have an infinite amount of water, will fill a vessel. And so the Torah does that. It fills the infinity of what becomes space and time. And but the inner, and the Torah has generally four dimensions, right? From the word pardes, pshat, drosh, remez, and sod. We won't go into that, but the secret, the sod level is associated with Kabbalah. And in a famous discourse from the Rebbe on the essence of Hasidus, he describes Hasidus as a fifth dimension, meaning a dimension that encompasses all of them. All of these are words that need to be, elaborated upon and taught in themselves. But just to give us a sense here, where he's talking about Hasidus. Hasidus, which is the fifth dimension, encompassing all levels of the Torah, the characteristic is characterized by fire. Why is it characterized by fire? And back into the Yom Yom. Because it infuses the revealed Torah, which is all the other aspects of Torah, including the revealed part, which we call the secrets of the Torah. It infuses the revealed Torah with life, vitality. Just like the sun gives life and vitality to planet Earth, so Hasidus gives light and vitality, chayas, life, to all. It enlivens all the other four dimensions of the Torah. When one learns a halacha and knows that after his 120 years on earth, or more, I'm putting that in, he will learn the same halacha in Gan Eden. In other words, when one realizes that what we're learning down here is not only eternal in terms of beyond time, but it reaches up and up in infinite levels. And as we go up and up in infinite levels in our ascent from here to the lower Gan Eden, the upper Gan Eden, we have an ascent closer and closer to that ball of fire, that ball of life, which is called Hasidus. And if a person thinks about that, it puts a little fire into him, even as we're here down below, as we are moving into learning Hasidus right now. So that's today's Hayom Yom. To get us grounded here, if you're using Lessons in Tanya, if you're using that book, it's at the top of page 92. And if you're using this book, Likutei Amorim, the classic edition, it's on page, the middle of 216. So today we're going to, as our custom on Friday is to learn both Friday and Shabbos, and we have a fair amount to do in a short amount of time. But thank the Alter Rebbe. This piece is not as analytical or as cosmological as the other pieces we've been dealing with, and it answers the question for those of you who are newcomers. The question at the beginning of this particular letter, which is the letter Hey, the fifth letter in Igeres HaKodesh, he quotes a pasuk. He quotes a pasuk from Shmuel that says, David HaMelech, made a name. He asked David Shem. And we've been exploring, what does it mean to make a name? Well, in English, we say he made a name for himself. He became famous. But that isn't the pshat that he became famous. He was already famous. He made the name, meaning he drew the name of God, the Yud K Vav K. And you see my hand stepping down from Yud to K to Vav to K. He drew the effulgence of godliness into the world. Or as we would say in English, plain English, He brought a revelation of godliness into the world. He accomplished what the Rebbe tells us over and over again is our mission, the mission of Adam in general, he accomplished making a dwelling place for Hashem in the lower world. And of course, that dwelling place was the Holy Temple, which he designed and his son Shlomo HaMelech implemented. And the presence of God was actually here on earth, so you could go up to Yerushalayim and see the presence of Hashem, not just feel it and understand it the way we are now, but beginning to see it. The Geula mentality, the Geula perspective was there within the Holy Temple. And that's called making a name, because each letter of the name of Avaya, Yud Ke Vav Ke, is a different expansion or extrusion would be a better word, from the essence of Hashem, first into the crystallization of the Yud, then spreading out into the Hey, then drawn down in the Vav, and then finally manifest in the lower Hey, which is called Malchus, and he was the Melech. He was Melech HaMashiach of his time. So now we'll answer, that's the question we put on the table. What does it mean to make a name? I've answered it in terms of how the Alter Rebbe has expressed until now. And now he's going to give us a couple of days, today and Shabbos, what that means to us. Now, okay, we'll start. When it comes to the human being down here below, and particularly the Jew down here below, for example, a mashal. So Misha hu Chacham Gadol, a person who's very wise, a haskil niflois hachma, and understands the wondrous aspects of the wisdom of the Torah. Umetzamtzum sichlei, and that very wise person contracts his or her seichel, her intellect, umarshavtoi, and his or her thought, ba'ois echad, into one letter, midabure. In other words, the classic example is given as between a teacher and a student, or between a parent and a child. When you take what's in your brain and direct it toward a makabel, a receiver, you have to narrow it down into language and letters that the person will understand. It's useless to give it over the way it is in your mind if that's not acceptable or receivable by the child or the student. Or in this case, we're talking about Hashem being mashbiah to the world. The world can't accept it as it is. It has to go through contractions. And the metaphor we've been exploring, just like you contract your thought into speech and the speech comes out of your mouth, so Hashem contracts himself, that's called the tzimtzum, in order to be revealed down here below. So the mashal, if a very wise person wants to give over something from speech, in izehu tzimtzum otzim, it's a great contraction, distillation, if you will, whatever you want to call it, from that original source in the mind of the great Chacham. And it's a great descent, in relation to that wise person's wondrousness of wisdom. So in the same way, this metaphor, what we've just said is metaphorical. So in the same way, the Yesim is then even more so, Le'en Kates, without limit, Hashem's, there is a great contractedness, virav, in very many and great contractions, when Hashem so-called speaks, right? Everything is created in the metaphor of speech. Yedaber Hashem spoke. That's what we're quoting here. In the beginning, Vayemer Hashem, he said, and there was light. All in the metaphor of speech to indicate the coming down and down and down and contracting himself in such a way that creation comes into being. That's the metaphor. With the speech of God, he made the heavens, the Sheshes Yemei Bereshis, in the 6 days of creation. And another pasuk, with the breath of his mouth, because that's what empowers speech. With the breath of his mouth, he made all the hosts. And what is the breath of his mouth? The breath meaning that stream of air which goes into each and every articulated letter. So that's the letter Hey. Ois Hey. That's the last letter of the Shem Havaya. David made a name. He brought from Yud, which is God's Chokhmah, down and down and down through the midos and spoke, because that's what the king does. That's why the king is analogous to the King of Kings. The physical king down here creates everything. All the movement and activities that go on in the kingdom are done through his speech. He gives edicts. He writes. He sends posts. He writes things, says things, and his people go out and post them up on the trees. Or today they just tell us in chats, and they tell us over the internet. But it's all letters of words and speech which are promulgating whatever the kingdom wants to promulgate, and whatever the king wants the kingdom to promulgate. So metaphorically, that's the letter He, the letter He of the Yud Ke Vav Ke. Because the letter He is associated with, that last letter He is associated with Malchus, the spirit which gives instantiation to God's kingdom. That's the He of the Shem Havaya. The name, that's the letter He of the name Havaya Baruch Hu, which is called in the Zohar Asa Kalila, a light letter, because it's just breath. It says, these are the days of heaven and earth, Behiborim, when they were created. Now, if you're looking and fortunate enough to be looking inside here, Behiborim, when they were created, can be, and we're bringing now a midrash that says, Behiborim. That word He, Behiborim, if you look at it, you could take the He apart from the Borim and say, with the letter He, he created. So the midrash tells us that the word that in Hebrew for creating the Hiborim is, if you look at it closely, you could see that it's with the He Borim, the He Borim. Himakar hates maimonis, and that He is the source of all the other 9 sayings, the fiats of creation, which come from the first utterances. The first utterance, and this may be news to some people, the first utterance is the word Bereshis. Yehi-or is the second. Bereshis. Bereshis, if you count them, there are only 9. Bereshis has to be included to make the 10 utterances. Bereshis, and that's what our sages have said in the Gemara. Bereshis nami maim. That Bereshis, the word Bereshis, with which the whole Torah begins, is also a spoken entity. It's an utterance of speech. Which in that first utterance, or the first instantiation, let's say, of godliness outside of God's essence, is the letter Yud. And the letter Yud is the first letter of Hashem's name, which goes on Chochmah, and Nikra Bereshis. So in other words, if you take the word Bereshis in the beginning, separate the bays and call it, you could read it with or in Rashis, in his head, and the top of his head is Chochmah. In the top of his head is where creation started. Right? Just like by us, when we want to create something, if we thought about it, it had to originate somewhere back in our mind, whether it is what we were going to create. So analogously, it originated Bereshis in the head of the Godhead, so to speak, in Chochmah, the beginning of creation. However, that beginning of creation, the Yud, it had to go through all kinds of descent in order to be instantiated into worlds. And that whole process, the Alter Rebbe tells us, originally was done without any arousal from below, because human beings, and those who are going to serve Hashem have not yet been created. So it comes from what's called an arousal from above, or what's also called chesed chinam, gratuitous kindness. He did it on his own, without any arousal from below. Now here we're getting to David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the king, and he has an avodah. The king has an avodah to fulfill God's wish for the kingdom. And each one of us, as the Rebbe tells us over and over again, have a spark of Mashiach within us. And that spark is meant to be a little flame to also bring down God's kingdom here below, to make a dwelling place for Hashem. But initially, there was nobody. So it was an arousal without an arousal from below. Ki adam ein la'avod. There was not yet any person down here to serve him. Raki chofetz chesed hu. It's called gratuitous kindness. And it says, Va'olam hasid yibon. It's a pasuk. the world is built with kindness. In this case, we're meaning with Hashem's gratuitous kindness that he came out of himself, out of his essence, and brought forth creation. And this is what it means, behiborim. As we said earlier, with the hay he created, but now the Alter Rebbe is going to take it in a different direction. You could take the same letters and say the Avraham, the very same letters. Behiborim he created, or with the hay he created, the hay borom, or with Avraham. Avraham was the first Jew, right? The first one and what that means is the first one to bring to the world down here below the sense of the presence of the singular God in everything. So Avraham is also woven into that word with the hay when he created them. Avraham. Ki chesed la'Avraham. It says the kindness belongs to Avraham. And so again, God is kind in that he gives himself over and allows himself to be graspable in some way through his simsum and contraction and descent. And that human being who is singularly responsible for making that awareness present initially in the timeline is Abraham. However, after the world has been created, or after the Adam has been created down here below, la'avda, to serve Hashem, from then on, from the time that Adam Harishon and everyone who comes from him has been created, from then on, the arousal from above to arouse the attribute of God's chesed to continue to contract himself into the world, comes from below. And what's the arousal from below? With the tzedakah and the kindness that the Jewish people down here below. This is midah keneged midah. Our kindness manifests his kindness. Our going out of ourselves, which is kindness and is the emblem of tzedakah, going out of yourself, arouses God to go out of himself, so to speak, from his aloneness and bring about the creation and to bring about the multiplicity. The whole of creation is called anavim, poor people. The whole creation is called poor people because it has nothing at all without the effusion from above. So the whole creation now we're viewing here as an act of tzedakah. And tzedakah and the arousal of God to do that act of tzedakah is provoked by our arousal of tzedakah down here below. Therefore, our sages have said, if a person says the only thing I have is Torah, I have a lot of Torah, I know how to learn, I'm learning a lot, without any acts of kindness, the person learns without a lot of any acts of kindness. So our sages said, if that's the case, you don't even have Torah, because Torah is not about philosophy. Torah is not about wisdom. I mean, it is, but it's about instead of making the making a dwelling place in the lower world below, and that's through mitzvahs. So Torah without mitzvahs, you don't even have Torah because you missed the point. A person has to be occupied in Torah in acts of kindness. Top of page Chavtes. Yes, even though it's true that Chokhmah originates in the wisdom of Hashem, and it is from that place that all worlds become extant. And without that, and that's the place and up there is where there's a place where the Torah derives. And through the acts of speech, right? It's through the acts of speech that, first of all, that he created, and through Torah shel ba'al peh, right? The Torah from the mouth, which is the oral Torah, that's the process of mamshichim, drawing down these supernal oros, the hashpos, and these flows. So Chokhmah Eloah, is this makar. It's the source of the Torah coming down below. Lebechinis oisius hadibur is the source of letters of speech. Now he's reverted back to the metaphor, just like our conscious mind is the ultimate source of what comes out of our mouth. So Chokhmah, the first level of consciousness in the Godhead, is the source but it's the source, and it has an intentionality with it. God, just like we are not meant to be alone with the Torah and just learning, God is not meant to be alone with his own wisdom. His wisdom is designed to come down through oisius hadibur, through metaphorically the letters of speech, shebehem nivra olam, through which the world has been created. Kamai Marizal, as the sages have said, our sages have said, al tikra bonoyech, it says, don't read your children, this is the word children, ela bainoyech, your builders. So about the Torah and about the Jewish people, not that it's your children, we are your children. And the Torah, you could say, and it's actually brought in Midrash Rabbah in Bereshis, that the Torah is like an infant, a suckling child to Hashem. It's Hashem's baby, as we would say. That's my baby. Yeah, but don't read it just my child. Ela boinoyech. It's meant to be a builder. The chokhmah of Torah is meant to be a force for building something down here below. And this drawing down from chokhmah Allah down to malchus, out of the mouth, and then instantiation of deeds, is a great descent. And with this, when we do this, we bring ourselves out of our own selves and give tzedakah, which is why tzedakah is called, all mitzvahs are called tzedakah, then that arouses an arousal from above that God can, and we'll learn this when we or whoever we're with start learning the Maimorim of Rosh Hashanah. The head of the year on Rosh Hashanah coming up very soon is that Maimorim of the Rebbeim over and over again bring out that Rosh Hashanah is, why is it called the head of the year? Because it renews God's engagement every year, that his head should be, engaged. He shouldn't be aloof, like a professor who decides to go into a cubicle and learn for the rest of his life. We want you, God, not to be aloof. We want you to come down. And that's renewed each and every year. As a result, sort of through our acts down here below. And for this, it's necessary, our chesed down here below is necessary to evoke God's supernal chesed, and to have it nimshach, and to have it be drawn down, like water flows from a high level to a low level. And this is accomplished after we human beings have been created. We have been created to arouse God, to continually re-engage in this activity, through our arousal from below, which is through our tzedakah, our acts of giving, the chesed, and acts of kindness, tato, down here below. Which we, in doing it, are giving life to people who are in need of more life. Money gives food, gives sustenance, and that draws down, that Hashem re-engages in contracting himself to engage in his act of tzedakah and chesed, which is to continue the creation. Down and in live, the spirit of shfolim v'nedochim, those who are low and those who are oppressed. And this is written in Yirmiyahu, in Jeremiah. A wise person should not praise himself or be praised about his wisdom. What should he be praised in? He should be praised for what he does. Ki ani Hashem, and Hashem says this even about himself. Ani Hashem oiseh chesed. I am God. And you know what defines me? Oiseh chesed, that I do kindness. Ki chesed hu hamamshich chai hachokma lamata. Because this kindness, because this kindness is what draws down the life of the wisdom, the seminal point of God's wisdom down here below. Excuse me. V'him lav, and if not, then it's called only God's wisdom, bli hamshacha chayim chamamenu chas v'sholom, without any drawing down of godliness down here below. Now, with that, we have finished today's Tanya. I'm going to just pause for an opportunity. This is going to go a little after 8 because it's long and we want to do Shabbos. But I'll give a pause here. Anybody who needs to leave or has a question or comment on what we've said so far. Okay, in a nutshell, the greatness of God, if it's what it's that, the greatness of God is not his chachma, it's his doing. And that's our greatness also, to the extent that we're built in his image. We're built not to be closet philosophers, wise people. We're built to take that wisdom and fuse it into every corpuscle, every action, every detail of physical reality through the mitzvahs, of which the all-inclusive mitzvahs tzedakah, because that embodies what mitzvahs are about, which is going out of yourself to serve somebody else. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so we're going to forge on here. Okay? With this, we'll understand what the Holy Arizal said. There are two kinds of souls, and he's going to talk about closet philosophers and doers. Closet philosophers, of course, these are holy people, and this is about not secular philosophy, this is about Torah. So that there are neshamas of Talmidei Chachamim. There are certain souls who are designed to be focused on learning. Neshamas Talmidei Chachamim, the souls of the wise students. Oiskim b'Torah kol yameim, and they occupy themselves with Torah all day. And then there are other kinds of souls at another extreme. Neshamas bali mitzvahs. These are the souls of people who are occupied in mitzvahs, doing. Oiskim b'tzedakah gumilas chasadim, and that's their preoccupation and primary occupation, to be occupied in acts of kindness, of righteousness and kindness. At first glance, well, first of all, there's a little problem with talking about souls who are just Talmidei Chachamim, because in the first place, the Torah obligates even the Talmid Chacham, even one who's Torah umonosoi, Torah is his profession, to stop learning for a few mitzvahs like Shema and a mitzvah that's impossible, that needs to be done, but there's nobody else to do it. So you can't say that there's someone who's 100% involved in wisdom. And also, that's number one, because the Torah itself says so. There are occasions when he has to be or she has to be involved. And the other is what we said earlier, that if a person says, all I have is Torah, then he doesn't or she doesn't even have Torah. So at first glance, you have to some way see that even the Talmidei Chachamim have to be engaged in acts of kindness. As we just said, that if you're not, then you don't have the Torah. Ella, except Talmidei Chachamim, those who are in the category of Talmidei Chachamim, Ikar, where the Torah study is their main thing. And only very little of their day, in cumulative days or of each day, is in acts of kindness. And you should know that all that other stuff that they're doing is not wasted. They're not just learning for their own self. That learning is also an avoida, right? Talmud Torah, by the way, is a commandment also. It's a mitzvah. So what are they accomplishing through the Talmud Torah? They do affect an arousal down below with their just learning, but not too far down below. They affect an arousal below. They arouse God's kindness, because after all, it is a mitzvah. They arouse God's kindness and God's flow, to cause a descent of the infinite light, which is enclosed in the supernal Chachma, which is the makar of Torah Hashem, the source, and that's in their mouths. The deed is not there, but the mouth, they have brought it down from deep levels of consciousness into the mouth. So they are affecting a downward flow of enlivening, but only into the worlds of souls, in the world of Bria, the second world down. Talmud, through their occupation in Talmud, that's the Gemara. And also they bring chayas into the spiritual beings, which we call angels, in the world of Yetzirah. Al Yedei Liman HaMishnah, through the learning of the Mishnah. One is through Talmud and one is through Mishnah. Yan hiyes chayes in the shomis v'melochin nishpoes misurufi oisis adibur, because the souls, the life force of the souls of angels also comes from God's speak. Remember, Behashem beyud kei tzurei lomim, with the yud and the hey, he creates all worlds, including all the spiritual worlds and all the entities in those spiritual worlds. So speech has an activating power. It does bring chayas down to certain levels. And we're talking here about the levels of Bria and Yetzirah. And this is the oral Torah, right? It's Torah from the mouth, Torah shebal peh, Torah which is coming out from the domain of speech, of God's speech. Umakara oisius, which is the source of all the letters, which comes this, which, and that the letters which come out in the Torah shebal peh are sourced in Chochmah Elah, the supernal Chochmah. So everything, the encapsulation of what we're saying now is, or Ein Sof, the infinite light itself, is first embodied in Chochmah, and then comes down and down through into Malchus, where it creates, and it brings forth worlds, Olam HaBatzilus, Olam HaBriya, Olam Yetzirah, and ultimately Olam HaZeh HaGashmi. So the essence of God is enclosed in absolutely everything, but in different degrees of condensation or distillation or tzimtzum or contraction. But to bring it down further than the breath, which is just the speech coming out of the mouth, which is to bring it down further to the Hey Tatah, to the lower Hey, which is Malchus, the instantiation of kingdom, L'olam hazeh, to bring it down to this world, L'olam hazeh shuffle to this lower world, Shehu tzimtzum gadol, which is a great contraction, B'yeseh oz, with much greater power. It's not sufficient, the arousal from below of those who are just learning, and whose occupation in only a few parts of their day is in tzedakah or gemilas chasadim. It needs much more than the occasional act of physical mitzvah that a real Talmid Chacham does. You need much more. The Bali mitzvahs. You need the arousal of what he calls here the masters of mitzvahs, the ones who are oisik, who are occupied in gemilas chasadim, in the mitzvahs down here below. We're turning the page in the classic Tanya 218. Who are involved in most of their day with acts of kindness, with tzedakah and acts of kindness. As is written in the first part of Tanya, Bechelak Aleph, in the first part, Perik Lamed Dalet. And therefore, the ones who are engaged in acts of tzedakah and chesed are called Tamchei Araisa, those who support the Torah. And it does mean financial support, but it means we give legs to God's wisdom. We give legs to God's mouth. We support, hold up, and bring down that flow from above. Excuse me a second. Netzach v'choid are the levels of the minos. So we've spoken about Chachma and we've spoken about Malchus, but in between we have Chesed, Gevurah, Netzach, and Hod. Netzach in the analogy of the spheres, if you've seen this on paper, the sphere is diagrammed as a human being, right brain Chachma, left brain Bina. So the right leg is Netzach, and the left leg is Hod. And it's with legs that you walk the walk. And it's with mitzvahs that you walk the walk of God's talk. God's talking the talk. But he's also walking the walk by he invests himself in these lower spheros. But we're the ones who walk the walk down here below in Olam HaZeh HaGashmi, which is the physical, which is his real target. This is the place where he wants a dwelling place, B'Tachtonim. So Bali Oisik, Bali, ones who are masters of deed, they are walking the walk. That's the midah netzek v'choy. They're the ones, and hopefully we're the ones, involved in Maisa, deeds of tzedakah and chesed, who bring the Torah down here below, la'olam ha'asiyah, in the world of deed. And that's why we'll understand why tzedakah is called the deed. Meshikosav, it's written in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, in Isaiah, v'hoya masa hatzedakah shalom, ayin shon. It's the deed of tzedakah which brings peace, or which brings wholeness. I'm darshaning that because it starts in the Chassidus shalom to mean wholeness, because it makes it completes the game. It completes the puzzle. It completes the intention. It brings down godliness into the physical world. Because the whole purpose is to draw down the light of Hashem into this world of doing. And this is the exact meaning, or looking into the preciseness of the meaning of what's brought in the Holy Zohar. Man da'ovid shemei kadisha. Who is the one who makes the holy name? Again, makes the holy name. The ovid, the daikid, who does it? It's the one who does the mitzvahs maisius. Kiba isarusa lasata, because it's through the arousal from below. This is back to David made a name. He instantiated God's kingdom on earth. And we have that spark within us and the responsibility and obligation to do that ourselves, because we contain that mission and the capability to fulfill that mission, to bring God's name, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, instantiate it in the physical world down here below through tzedakah, the chesed, tatah, through doing righteousness and kindness down here below, ma'oreh chesed olyon, and that arouses God's kindness up above, which ultimately arouses or re-arouses, as is the theme of Rosh Hashanah. That's why it's called the beginning of the year. It's a total new arousal of God's desire to be kind by continuing the creation. And that arouses God's kindness, which goes up, and God's manifests God's will, his wisdom, and goes even further and manifests his ratzon, his will to create. So this is the audience of which we rises, the work way down here below rises up to God's Chachma Elah, which is the Yud of the Shem Havaya, Bechinas Dibur, and arouses him to come down and invest himself in the level of speech, his kingship. Malchus Malchus Kol Elamim. His kingdom is the kingdom of all world, his Malchus. So it arouses God to invest himself in his Ruach Piv, with the breath of his mouth, metaphorically, is Baruch, in order to bring flow, reality, to bring reality, what we call reality, into existence and to enliven it down here in the world of Asiyah, in the world of doing. Like Mashal, and by way of example, the Havdal Elef Havdalas, thousands upon thousands of levels of division between us and him, in case without measurableness. Nevertheless, we do make, and the Torah permits us to make mashalim, metaphors from the way we are to him, even though there's infinite number of distance between us and him. Just like a person, here's the metaphor again, and this is our conclusion, this whole metaphor of speech and letters. Just like a person, when do you speak? When you have something to give over to somebody else. Otherwise, you could just sit and think. Speech is designed for relating to another. So God speak, he comes down to speak because that's his intention, to give over something to another. And in this case, it's not just to give over something to another, but to create the other, to bring the other into existence. And that's God speak. A person doesn't speak, normally at least, when he's alone. We're staying in the metaphor. And so a person contracts his mind, and his thought, in speech. So God does the same thing. And he does that, metaphorically, he does the same thing. So his speech is aleihem. his speech is upon them. V'hamaskilim, and he concludes, v'hamaskilim yavinu, and those who are capable of understanding will understand what we just said. And I think everybody here is capable. Because it's, right? I hope, now let's give a little time for any questions or comments. I mean, the bottom line, the straightforward message is that just as we are designed to come from inner consciousness to express that consciousness in an outer way through speech, that's a metaphor for the way Hashem, can't say is designed because he's the designer of it all. That's the way he's built, to take from his level of depth of consciousness into metaphoric speech, which is what's responsible for the life of everything that exists from Atzilus on down, and particularly when it comes down, when the speech is translated into the deed of mitzvahs into this world of Asiyah. Anything? All right, if you don't have comments and questions for your newcomers, if we usually do, we try to end at least with Ubechein. This whole thing is called Tanya, so what? So what's the so what? What do we do with this today in Shabbos?
Give more tzedakah before Shabbos.
Excellent, simple and wonderful, good, beautiful. Anything else? Well, if not, and in the interest of time, I'll add one, which is, we've talked about this in general, because a lot of Tanya is about tzedakah. Tzedakah isn't just about money. Tzedakah is, money is the metaphor, really. You take from something that you worked hard on and give it away, right? So it's a metaphor down here below for giving of yourself in any respect. Find opportunities to give of yourself, to come out of your wrapped up in yourself and relate to another in a way that the other needs to be related to. And with that, we could spend a lifetime, but we'll spend at least the next couple of days. Good Shabbos till Sunday.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Shabbos, thank you.